Now Jesus' mother and brothers came to see him, but they were not able to get near him because of the crowd. Someone told him,
"Your mother and brothers are standing outside, wanting to see you."
He replied,
My mother and brothers are those who hear God's word and put it into practice.
While Jesus was still talking to the crowd, his mother and brothers stood outside, wanting to speak to him. Someone told him,
"Your mother and brothers are standing outside, wanting to speak to you."
He replied to him,
Who is my mother, and who are my brothers?
Pointing to his disciples, he said,
Here are my mother and my brothers. For whoever does the will of my Father in heaven is my brother and sister and mother.
Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him,
"Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you."
Who are my mother and my brothers?
He asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said,
Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother.
That day, when evening came, he said to his disciples,
Let us go over to the other side.
Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat, so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him,
"Teacher, don't you care if we drown?"
He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves,
Quiet! Be still!
Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples,
Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?
They were terrified and asked each other,
"Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him."
Chapter 5. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice,
"What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? Swear to God that you won't torture me!"
For Jesus had said to him,
Come out of this man, you evil spirit.
Then Jesus asked him,
What is your name?
"My name is Legion,"
he replied.
"for we are many."
And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus,
"Send us among the pigs. Allow us to go into them."
He gave them permission, and the evil spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said,
Go home to your family and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you.
So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed.
Then he got into the boat, and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying,
"Lord, save us! We're going to drown!"
He replied,
You of little faith, why are you so afraid?
Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked,
"What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him."
When he arrived at the other side in the region of the Gadarenes, 2 demon-possessed men coming from the tombs met him. They were so violent that no one could pass that way.
"What do you want with us, Son of God?"
They shouted,
"Have you come here to torture us before the appointed time?"
Some distance from them, a large herd of pigs was feeding. The demons begged Jesus,
"If you drive us out, send us into the herd of pigs."
He said to them,
Go.
So they came out and went into the pigs, and the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and died in the water. Those tending the pigs ran off, went into the town, and reported all this, including what had happened to the demon-possessed men. Then the whole town went out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they pleaded with him to leave their region.
One day, Jesus said to his disciples,
Let's go over to the other side of the lake.
So they got into a boat and set out. As they sailed, he fell asleep. A squall came down on the lake, so that the boat was being swamped, and they were in great danger. The disciples went and woke him, saying,
Master, Master, we're going to drown.
He got up and rebuked the wind and the raging waters. The storm subsided, and all was calm.
Where is your faith?
He asked his disciples. In fear and amazement, they asked one another,
Who is this? He commands even the winds and the water, and they obey him.
They sailed to the region of the Gerasenes, which is across the lake from Galilee. When Jesus stepped ashore, he was met by a demon-possessed man from the town. For a long time, this man had not worn clothes or lived in a house, but had lived in the tombs. When he saw Jesus, he cried out and fell at his feet, shouting at the top of his voice,
"What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me."
For Jesus had commanded the evil spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had seized him, and though he was chained hand and foot and kept under guard, he had broken his chains and had been driven by the demon into solitary places. Jesus asked him,
What is your name?
"Legion,"
he replied, because many demons had gone into him. And they begged him repeatedly not to order them to go into the abyss. A large herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into them, and he gave them permission. When the demons came out of the man, they went into the pigs, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the lake and was drowned. When those tending the pigs saw what had happened, they ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they found the man from whom the demons had gone out, sitting at Jesus' feet, dressed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people how the demon-possessed man had been cured. Then all the people of the region of the Gerasenes asked Jesus to leave them, because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and left. The man from whom the demons had gone out begged to go with him, but Jesus sent him away, saying,
Return home and tell how much God has done for you.
So the man went away and told all over town how much Jesus had done for him.
When Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue rulers, named Jairus, came there. Seeing Jesus, he fell at his feet and pleaded earnestly with him,
"My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her, so that she will be healed and live."
So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him. and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors and had spent all she had. Yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak, because she thought,
"If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed."
Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized that power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked,
"Who touched my clothes?"
You see the people crowding against you,
his disciples answered.
and yet you can ask, who touched me?
But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her,
"Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering."
While Jesus was still speaking, some men came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler.
Your daughter is dead,
they said.
Why bother the teacher anymore?
Ignoring what they said, Jesus told the synagogue ruler,
"Don't be afraid. Just believe."
He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue ruler, Jesus saw a commotion, with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them,
"Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep."
But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her,
"Talitha cum,"
which means,
"Little girl, I say to you, get up."
Immediately the girl stood up and walked around. She was 12 years old. At this they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this, and told them to give her something to eat.
While he was saying this, a ruler came and knelt before him and said,
"My daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her and she will live."
Jesus got up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Just then, a woman who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak. She said to herself,
"If I only touch his cloak, I will be healed."
Jesus turned and saw her.
"Take heart, daughter,"
he said.
"Your faith has healed you."
And the woman was healed from that moment. When Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the noisy crowd, he said,
"Go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep."
But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread through all that region.
Now, when Jesus returned, a crowd welcomed him, for they were all expecting him. Then a man named Jairus, a ruler of the synagogue, came and fell at Jesus' feet, pleading with him to come to his house, because his only daughter, a girl of about 12, was dying. As Jesus was on his way, the crowds almost crushed him. And a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years, but no one could heal her. She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped.
"Who touched me?"
Jesus asked. When they all denied it, Peter said,
"Master, the people are crowding and pressing against you."
But Jesus said,
"Someone touched me. I know that power has gone out from me."
Then the woman, seeing that she could not go unnoticed, came trembling and fell at his feet. In the presence of all the people, she told why she had touched him, and how she had been instantly healed. Then he said to her,
"Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace."
While Jesus was still speaking, someone came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue ruler.
Your daughter is dead,
he said.
Don't bother the teacher anymore.
Hearing this, Jesus said to Jairus,
"Don't be afraid. Just believe, and she will be healed."
When he arrived at the house of Jairus, he did not let anyone go in with him except Peter, John, and James, and the child's father and mother. Meanwhile, all the people were wailing and mourning for her.
"Stop wailing,"
Jesus said.
"She's not dead, but asleep."
They laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But he took her by the hand and said,
"My child, get up."
Her spirit returned, and at once she stood up. Then Jesus told them to give her something to eat. Her parents were astonished, but he ordered them not to tell anyone what had happened.